I'm Frank Strait. Welcome to a special edition of the Carolina Weather Group. Well, we'll be spending some time with Chris Jackson, storm chaser based in South Carolina, who will be going over some of his footage from the tornadoes that affected South Carolina back on April 13th of 2020. Behind me, you see some of the houses that were involved in that tornado and were demolished by that tornado. As you can see, this time, almost 4 years later, the rebuilding process is complete and the recovery process is finished as well, although there's no doubt that the people who live in this area still have some horrific memories of what happened back on that day in April of 2020. Carolina Weather Group. I'm Frank Strait this evening on the road from Orlando, Florida tonight, where I'm attending a conference. But this week, it is the anniversary of a tornado outbreak across the Carolinas. And this week, our guest, Chris Jackson, revisits his storm chase as he was on the road chasing the tornadoes that morning and shares some of his never-before-seen footage. We have Chris with us here. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Frank. Good to be with you guys. So we got some, video. We're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of this, and looking back, it's still still the most significant tornado outbreak that's ever occurred in the state in a 1-day period. And just reflecting back on it and looking back on some of the video I had, like it really, I guess, hits home how significant of an impact that was to a lot of folks across the state.
Sure was. I've got a radar loop here to show folks what was going on that morning. And what was happening was what we call a QLCS tornado situation, which QLCS stands for quasi-linear convective system, basically means just a line of thunderstorms moving through. But in this particular case, conditions were favorable for there to be tornadoes developing along that line of thunderstorms. And so we're starting the loop here at just before 6 a.m. on the 13th of April, 2020. And I'll set this in motion so you can see the tornadoes progressing. And this is just before the tornado developed near Estill, and it went from 0 to almost 200 in no time at all there as that storm passed through Estill and across Hampton County and into Colleton County, and at times was still producing a tornado as it moved through the Walterboro area and into Dorchester County later that morning. That was one of, if I recall correctly, 23 tornadoes that occurred that morning. Is that right, Chris?
I believe so, something like that. I know it was like at least 12 of EF2 or greater significance. The most significant tornadoes in a single 24-hour period in state history.
That's a lot. To give you a comparison to how often we see a significant tornado that's one rated EF2 or higher, we have only had one of those so far in 2020, or in 2024 so far. We did not have one at all in 2023. So the last one before that would have been one that occurred back in 2022. And if memory serves me correctly, it was the April 5th and 6th tornado outbreak where that occurred the last time before that we had a significant tornado. So almost 2 years in between the last two occurrences.
The Estill tornado was the first F4 EF4 in the state since November 1995, and also that was the first F4 EF4 on record in the South Carolina Low Country, going back to I think 1950.
That's correct. Our official records go back to 1950, and not only that, that EF4 again, it's the first one since 1995, so the only one we've had the 21st century so far, and one of only 11 EF4 tornadoes that have occurred in South Carolina since 1950. We've never had an EF5, at least not yet.
Hopefully that never happens. And, outside of that EF4, at Estill and the Nixville area, you also had, twin EF3 tornadoes that did some pretty remarkable stuff as they developed down near the Barnwell and Williston area, moved up through Springfield, up close to the Neeses area, and then maybe did some Fujiwara stuff around north before eventually decaying and the storm cycle. I think it did go on to produce another tornado further downstream.
Right. That one had a long track tornado there going across Hampton and Colleton County and into Dorchester County. And I believe it cycled and, as you said, caused another tornado farther off to the east. And if I recall correctly, Berkeley and or Georgetown counties.
Yeah, that morning was something pretty significant. And it's something I'm never going to forget. That's for certain. I started the day off, and if you want to get into kind of a timeline of how things went for me, we can do that, or open to all questions.
Sure. We're here to hear your experiences. So just to kind of tell us your story. How did your day start out? I mean, you live near Columbia, right? So,
right. Well, right.
This outbreak started in the middle of the night. Did you sleep at all that night, or did you get up at like 2:30 in the morning, or how did you? How'd you get started?
It's really interesting you ask that question, because a lot of folks around here saw that the potential was increasing big time for a significant tornado event potential, the potential for, at least a couple of days in advance, really maybe 2 to 3 days in advance. And so at the time I was like, if it comes through here, it's going to be in the middle of the night. And so I started to adjust my sleep schedule. And I believe when the Bassfield and So-So EF4 tornado down in Mississippi was occurring, I was actually sleeping. I was in the middle of the day, or I think maybe afternoon hours. I was trying to adjust my sleep schedule. But the morning of, I remember taking a nap about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and slept till about 1 a.m. or so. Maybe even 12 a.m. I can't recall exactly, but something like that. And then I got up and looked at the radar and saw what was coming back in Georgia. And we also had a little confluence band that developed well out in front of the main stuff over east of Columbia, Lee, Sumter County. But it wasn't doing anything. It was clear that was not going to be the show. The show was coming back from the west through Macon, Georgia, and stuff like that. So I made a decision to get on I-20 from Casey and Columbia, and I went over to North Augusta, and was actually sitting on I-526, which is kind of like the little bypass around Augusta on the North Augusta side, of the Aiken-Augusta Highway overpass. And I sat there for probably about 45 minutes just waiting on it. And as I sat there, started to look at the individual cells and really started to think about the chess match of having to play this stuff, because I knew chasing a storm that could potentially produce significant tornadoes that time of night was going to be dangerous in itself. It's always dangerous around here just because of the roads and the poor visibility. But also I knew that this is at night. I'm probably not going to see a tornado. I'm not going to put my biggest thing that night was not putting myself in front of a tornado. So that was, forefront at the top of my mind was if I'm going to see something, or if I'm going to get close to anything, I'm going to have to come in the back door on it, so to speak. And so I ended up in North Augusta. And then from there, I started to see my storm that I really started eyeing on as it was coming through, I think, Waynesboro, Georgia, close to Plant Vogtle Nuclear Power Station. And so I adjusted just south a little bit more and ended up in the town of Jackson at the entrance of Savannah Riverside at Highway 278, which is kind of like the main entrance coming from Aiken to Savannah Riverside. Sat there. There's a gas station, I think the Hotspot gas station. Sat there for about 10, 15 minutes. Was looking at the radar, watching the winds. And then all of a sudden it went from 0 to 100. And the storm started, in I think maybe 2 or 3 scans, it went from, had the look it might want to produce a tornado to a, big debris ball on the radar. No doubt about it. I could see power flashes coming from Savannah Riverside. I can, see the light, the blue, green light. And so that's when I took off behind it down US 278 toward, I guess, the north side of Williston. And the tornado crossed the road right in front of me and, impacted a bunch of homes there. And, from there, I contacted the National Weather Service. That was the first thing I did. Is there any, oh my God, it's all gone. I got to call National Weather Service. I'm out here on 278 on the northeast side of Savannah Riverside, Sigtor. I've got damage at least an eighth of a quarter of a mile wide. I mean, there's nothing left. The trees are gone. Contact the weather service, let them know, hey, there is definitely a damaging tornado in progress. And so that really helped them out. They appreciated it. And from there, I called 911 to Aiken County Dispatch and told them, I had multiple homes that were damaged or destroyed, the best I could tell at the time, and told them to get all the help they could on the way. And I knew I was going to be by myself for a while, because to even get to where the homes were in my truck, I actually had to jump some pine trees that were laid across the road. And so that was an ordeal. And the first house I came up on, I'll share some video here, and come up on this house, and it's, a nice 1-story, maybe 1,400 square foot house. Half of it's completely gone. And so I go in the front door after I saw a light in a what appeared to be like a bedroom window. I saw a light hit the blinds. I'm like, there's somebody in the house. And so I went up to the house, and I was able to had to force the door in, because the house had been jarred off centered, so that the door didn't want to open, which is kind of expected. And got in there, and was two elderly folks. Well, I'm gonna say elderly, but they were, they were aging in their 60s, and they were in total shock. They were in total shock. They had some minor injuries, some lacerations, stuff like that. And I remember trying to get the lady out of her house, and she said, "Let me grab my car keys out of the kitchen." And I'll never forget, I looked down and said, "Ma'am, your kitchen's gone." Because the kitchen was gone. You don't need the keys. You don't need to lock the door. It's like, I hate to be this guy, but your house is destroyed. And, was able to get them out of the house and get them back to my truck. I had some towels. I had a little first aid kit because her husband had gotten some cuts on his face and stuff. And, I made them stay with me until help arrived. And I wanted to ensure that they had a dry roof over their head. At the time, it was, when this occurred, there was still tin falling out of the sky when I called the weather service. I mean, it happened right in front of me. And that was a night. I'll never forget that night. And, from there, I went and checked like 4 more houses. Thankfully, the houses that I did check, either nobody was home or everybody was already fine. They're waiting, in the front yard and shot like everyone else. And, from then I just stayed in that little general area until after sunrise. The roads were all clogged up. There's no way to get in and out. And so just hung out and waited. And then, let's see, after that, I started to follow the tornado path back to Columbia, because at this point I'm getting tired. Like everything started to wear off on me. Like I kind of want to nap, but I stayed with the tornado's path and, stopped in the town of Neeses. There was a huge search effort going on in the town of Neeses. It was actually quite incredible. They had mutual aid from different fire departments from Orangeburg County, I think some other surrounding counties. They had the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division was there with their helicopter. They were actually searching for people that were missing from the tornado. I think there was some children involved with that. And I don't quote me on this, but I believe there was a child fatality in Neeses from that the same tornado. And, that's heartbreaking. And continue to follow the path all the way up until basically the south side of North Air Force Base, to where I couldn't fly my drone anymore because of FAA regulations around airports, and especially in military installation like that. And after that, I went home, took a nap. And the next day, found out about Estill. We can go into Estill here in a minute if you want to.
Just shared my screen again with NOAA's Damage Assessment Toolkit to give folks some perspective on exactly what we're talking about if you're not from this part of South Carolina, and a lot of our viewers aren't. This is showing the damage path and the damage polygons from these tornadoes that he was talking about. The one that passed just north of Williston, and then a second one that formed just southeast of Williston and moved over toward the Neeses and Livingston area and passed just south of north. This off to the east here is Orangeburg, which accidentally zoomed down a little bit, but Orangeburg is here. Columbia is pretty much straight to the north there. And you're going down to US 321 to go into the Neeses and Livingston area there in the western part of Orangeburg County. So that tells y'all about where Chris was that night.
The biggest thing, for if there's any storm chasers that might watch this that are young or haven't experienced anything like this, like, it's not worth getting in front of a tornado ever, especially at night in the southeast in a major event where storm tornadoes are likely, where you can't see, and it's going to be rain wrapped anyway. Like, it's just not a recipe for success. So, like, know your bounds. And my bounds that night were so that if I'm going to see anything, it's going to be coming right from behind it. And that was kind of my one play I had. I knew I only had one play as fast as everything was moving. And, for me, I was able to be somewhere where I was able to actually help someone. So that's a win for me.
We'll have more from Chris Jackson in a minute, but first, a few words from this.
What an indoor environmental assessment looks like in a commercial building or business? During a full assessment, we collect data throughout the building and compare the measurements room to room. We can also collect samples that go to a lab, such as the small cassette shown here, which will be analyzed for types and amounts of mold in the air. We follow up with a physical inspection, looking for moisture sources and using moisture meters to determine if any of your building materials are wet.
Go-ESG.com or 336-373-153. To know your favorite Carolina Weather Group panelists? Well, check out our panelist playlist series. It's back for a limited time only when you listen to the Carolina Weather Group feed on Spotify. Dropping on Saturdays during April and May, you can find out our favorite hobbies, our interests, and get to know our music. It's only available until June, so don't wait. Check out the Carolina Weather Group on Spotify.
Scooted the map down a little bit here so y'all can get some perspective on where Estill is if you're not familiar with the South Carolina Low Country. Where my cursor is right now, that's Estill. The tornado went just a little south of downtown Estill, which is one of these don't blink or you'll miss it kind of places. There's I think one traffic light in Estill, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
So that's where it is. It went just south of Varnville. Walterboro's over here. Like I guess the tornado lifted and then touched back down here again, and touched down again west of Somerville. This is the Charleston area way over here, and right on the edge of the screen down here to the south is Savannah. So that gives you a perspective there. And this the thick gray line is I-95. So that tells you what part of the state you're looking at there.
And once I got into Estill, and the town proper was fine. It didn't, see anything from the tornado, but just south of town and over to the community of Nixville, I ended up going over to Lena Expressway was the first road I went to. And once I arrived there, I was like, whoa, this is a whole different ball game down here. Because the first thing I was greeted with was 4 homes that were just completely destroyed. One, there was no walls left. Actually, no, there was 2 that had no interior or exterior walls left standing. There was a red Chevy Tahoe that was picked up and thrown through the house. I guess what was left of it at the time. This Tahoe went airborne through the house. It went through a mobile home and ended up in the woods behind all this stuff, upside down, surrounded by 18 to 24-inch hardwood trees that had just been mowed down. And that was right off the get-go. I'm like, this is a whole different animal over here as far as intensity. And so I knew, EF3 all day long, probably stronger. That was before the rating had come out. And from there, I began to fly the drone, and I flew over toward, I think it was Washboard Lane, maybe? And there was a house over there that had also been completely leveled. All the exterior walls, all the interior walls have been destroyed. There was rubble. Some of the house was partially swept away. And I just continued to do that all day long. And, before I left the Lena Expressway, I did talk to some victims, and wow, their story. There was a young lady that was asleep in her bedroom, and the tornado, I guess the EAS alert on her telephone woken her up for the tornado warning, and she tried to get up to go, I guess, wake her. I think her grandma or her mom. Don't quote me on whichever one that was. I can't remember. It's been a minute. It's been 4 years, but. She went to go try to get her up and let her know what's going on. And before she could ever make it there, the tornado hit their house, and she woke up about 200 yards behind her house under a pine tree under her mattress. And she had a lot of injuries, but a lot of minor injuries. And, she's extremely lucky somebody was looking out for her that morning, and started to really talk to folks and understand the scope of this. Like, this is a big deal. And from there, continued to fly the drone all around that general area for that day. And as the sun started to go down, I went back home, and the next day I went to Nixville. And if you want to talk about Nixville a little bit before we go into that, we can.
So after your experience with the day after, so to speak, in the Estill and Nixville area, did you do any more picture taking and surveys of the other tornadoes that hit, or had you had enough at that point?
To be quite honest, after Nixville, after you start looking out in time, like a time span, by the time I spent 3 days down there, we're already a week. It's been a week since it happened. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit tired. I kind of wanted to just get away from it for a minute and kind of reset. And
right. We all have our limits.
That's exactly right. And I would love to have been able to drone every single square mile of, tornado damage across the state, but it was just so much. And just unbelievable. I never even got to Pickens or really even dove deep into what happened up in Pickens with the EF3 tornado up there. That was the first one of the day.
Yeah, the Seneca tornado. Yeah, that happened at like 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah, still to this day, I'm not even really familiar with how much damage. I mean, I know how much damage was done, but I'm not as intimately involved with that tornado as I am all the other ones that occurred, just because I'm one guy. I can only do so much.
This is the EF3 that hit Seneca. If I recall correctly, it caused $100 million worth of damage. So it was a major tornado for sure for that part of the state. Seneca's near Clemson. Clemson's here. Seneca's here. This is Lake Keowee here and Lake Jocassee at the top part of the screen. There was another tornado that touched down just west of Greenville, and this is Greenville here. So that gives you some perspective on where this was located. This is I-85, this thick line here, which runs, of course, through upstate South Carolina, Spartanburg, Greenville, south of Clemson, near Anderson, and then on into Georgia toward Atlanta.
Yeah, I know. I had personal friends of mine that I was on one of the South Carolina Task Force 5. It was a Type 2 urban search and rescue team, which there's 5 of them across the state. And the purpose of those is to mobilize very quickly to get to stuff like this. And actually, our team, which was comprised of Lexington County and Columbia Fire Department, they actually were mobilized to the Seneca tornado. And my old battalion chief actually went up there and they did some searching and stuff. But that was after my fire department days. But, that was such a big event. It taxed every part of the system. But also, I think the system did as good as you could ever hope it to do in that situation. I don't know of anything where I could even be halfway critical of anything that occurred that morning, because I feel like everybody was on top of their game.
Right, and it's a good thing. The real problem that night / morning is that it was happening in the middle of the night. And it's another cruel thing to have happen, is to have not only it's a significant tornado or a violent tornado, but it's one that's happening in the middle of the night when you're trying to sleep, and you're less likely to get the warnings in a timely fashion. And then on top of that, it's one of these QLCS situations where it's difficult to provide a good lead time. So again, it's another reason why you have to have your plans ready in advance, or else you may pay the price with more than just your belongings, and maybe with your life too.
Totally agree with you.
Right. So anyway, looking back at the damage assessment toolkit, you can see that family of tornadoes that was caused, I think, by the same embedded supercell in the upstate. There were a few more tornadoes. The first one of the morning or the night there was up by Lake Jocassee. Another one, which was an EF1, I guess, or an EF2 rather, was up in northern Pickens County. A little one just north of Greer there, not far from GSP Airport. And then the family of tornadoes that occurred later on, including the Seneca tornado. And again, that was the opening round there of tornadoes with this event. The ones that we were talking about earlier occurred a few hours later across South Carolina's coastal plain.
And it's really, this is something I tell a lot of folks here locally around Columbia, Livingston, that I've known, that I grew up with. I see all the time. As bad as it was, for a lot of the folks, imagine if that would have happened 35 miles to the north, up into, the really populated areas of Livingston and Richland County, or maybe even Aiken, North Augusta, down through all the little towns between there, Clearwater, Graniteville. It could have been so much worse, even as bad as it was.
It sure could have been. I mean, an event like that, had you taken that family of tornadoes that went across the coastal plain there and displace it up to the I-20 corridor, you may be talking about the kind of damage and loss of life that occurred with the Horrell Hill tornado back in 1924. That's South Carolina's worst tornado in terms of fatalities. Memory serves me correct, 75 people died in that storm. And that's just from the tornado. There was considerable damage from the tornado, and the parent supercell caused Columbia's worst hailstorm on record, I think. So that was an impressive storm, and something that could have happened again if that same supercell would have followed a similar track to the one back in 1924.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that also. Everything happens for a reason, and I'm just, as bad as it was, like I said, for those folks that morning, I'm glad it wasn't worse. And, going forward, I hope people do have a plan in place. I know I certainly try to message it when there's a threat, for folks to take it seriously, to not mess around and not go outside and try to find the tornado, because most of the time that's not going to work around here.
That's right.
Yeah. But, that's basically the whole experience. It was incredible. I just hate for the folks that lost loved ones, and lost all their belongings, lost all their livelihood, lost their homes. that had to just start all over. That's heartbreaking to see.
Happy to report that that the recovery process is complete, I guess, in that area, as you saw from that video that we opened with. The homes have been rebuilt. If you look in the forest, you can still see some damage, and you'll see some photos from that as well that we'll put in here. But it thankfully looks a whole lot different today. Most of the scars have been repaired, and we can be thankful for that. But we do want to remember what happened that day and the loss of life. So anyway, Chris, if there's anything else you want to put in, let me know what it is. Let's hear it.
I think we pretty much covered it. The biggest thing is just have a plan in place. And when you get a warning, especially if your phone goes off in the middle of the night, don't run to social media. Don't run outside to find some kind of confirmation bias. Go to your safe place.
Right, absolutely. Get to the safe place first. Get yourself, your family, and if your time permits, the pets. If your house is not already getting blown up, take the pets down there too. But get to your safe spot and then assess the situation. Don't do it when you hear the phone blow up in the middle of the night and say, "Oh, let's check the radar," some meteorologists like me or tend to do in those situations. Now, you got to get to your safe place first, and then decide what needs to happen next.
But I appreciate the time you guys took to have me on for tonight and kind of recount those experiences.
Sure, Chris. We'd love to have you on to tell your stories, and this is one that definitely needs to be told. It certainly is some part of South Carolina's history that deserves to be remembered, to borrow a phrase from another well-known YouTuber. So anyway, in wrapping things up, before I do, I want to point out that you can get more detailed safety for tornadoes and other types of disasters that can happen in South Carolina from SCEND's website, the Emergency Management Division at scend.org, and ready.gov also has that information spelled out clearly for you, no matter where you live, whether it's South Carolina, North Carolina, or another part of the country. So I think it's time to wrap it up, Chris. So thanks for being with us tonight. And again, we appreciate you telling your story. Tell us where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, you can find me on social media at Chris Jackson SC, like South Carolina, on Twitter or X. And on Facebook, you can find me at South Carolina Weather on Facebook. And Instagram is the same as Twitter, Chris Jackson SC. And if anybody has any questions, or if you were impacted by one of those tornadoes, I actually had someone reach out to me last week via Facebook asking if I had any video from a particular location that they were impacted by the tornado. I've got, dare I say, over 100 videos from all the damage and stuff that I've seen, flown, whatnot. If there's something you're curious of, shoot me a message.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, once again, thanks for joining us. And that's going to do it for this week here on Carolina Weather Group. Stay subscribed, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Carolina Weather Group. For Chris Jackson, I'm Frank Strait. Thanks for joining us tonight, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
And let you guys see what it is that I'm experiencing.
Trying to get a direct measurement with a handheld Kestrel anemometer here. We'll see what we can pick up, but and there goes change.
When a tornado-warned cell came through the neighborhood, and it brought down several large pines, just like the one you're seeing right here behind me. To give you a sense of what the aftermath of storm damage smells like, it smells very heavily of pine and also sounds like chainsaws. We have another tree down here. This one just barely missing this brick home.
I mean, this is incredible. Let me turn the camera around, get us back into kind of a dry view.
And I get up here, and all of a sudden the storm surge started. And all of a sudden, I ended up in about 4 feet of water.
I'm Scotty Powell here, reporting just outside of Sparta, North Carolina, where you've seen a lot of the earthquake damage. Again, a 5.1 magnitude earthquake rocked Sparta, North Carolina earlier this morning, just after 8 a.m.
If you're going to look at the footing of that, you'll see where it was a twist. very severe wind to cause destruction.
From Gaston County to back here in Mecklenburg County, those were just 2 of the tornado warnings that were issued here for the greater Charlotte area.
I'm not one for hyperbole, but it's countless at this point. There's trees on houses, there's a lot of roads that are blocked. We're just trying to get cleaned up so people can get through.
Have you ever seen the Dan River like this before?
No, not that I can recall. I mean, I've seen it fairly flooded before, but I've never seen it to where we're now kind of asking ourselves, okay, a couple more feet and it might get over those bridges.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. We're happy to have you this evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the 9-year anniversary, April 16, 2011. If you live in North Carolina, anywhere around that time period, or even now, you remember the major tornado outbreak that occurred. And tonight, we're going to be looking back at that event. We have with us tonight Mike Mays, Chief Meteorologist at WRAL. We also have with us Dan Whitaker and Jeremy Gilchrist. They were out in the field chasing these tornadoes, and so we're going to get their perspectives. Also with us, we have Tim Buckley, who is the Chief Meteorologist at WFMY, but at the time was working in Wilmington, North Carolina at WWAY. And we have Gannon Medwick on with us, who is Chief Meteorologist at WECT in Wilmington, but at the time was working at WNCT in New Bern, North Carolina. And we have with us Jeff Orrock, and he is the meteorologist in charge at the NWS office in Wakefield, Virginia. But at the time, he was also working at the NWS in Raleigh. So we have a big group of guests with us tonight. So looking forward to each and everyone's perspective of this event. I do want to hand it off to Mike first, kind of let him give a brief background of his recall of this event, because he has to run and get some things done. So Mike, I want to kick it off to you first, and tell us a little bit about your perspective. I know you was on the air during the event, so kind of talk to us about the lead up to the event and any memories during covering the tornado that you remember.
First off, I'll apologize. We got our cleaning crew coming into the studio, so it's probably going to get loud because he's pushing his garbage can around. I recall a few days prior to the event, which happened on a Saturday, SPC putting us in a risk. I believe it was moderate on that Friday, and then Saturday morning I woke up to a high risk. Now, at the time, Greg Fischel, who was the chief meteorologist at the time, was out of town. He had a family emergency up in Pennsylvania, so he had to leave. So I have never covered an event as massive as the one that happened on that Saturday without him being here. So it's kind of like he's Batman, I'm Robin, and then Batman's gone and Robin has to take over. So for somebody who's never been the lead, it was kind of nerve-wracking. But I had Nate Johnson with me, who had tornado coverage experience. He was the chief meteorologist in Abilene, Texas. You guys probably all know Nate. So that morning, just the way the atmosphere felt, you could tell something was coming. And around lunchtime, 1 o'clock, we started having the tornadoes develop over the Sandhills. The first one, I believe, was in Sanford, had caused the damage to the Lowe's home improvement store there and tracked to the north and east. Now, I've been here in North Carolina since 1994. I've been in tornado coverage, but I've never had tornado coverage of long track tornadoes like the ones we saw that day. And at one point we had 4 tornadoes on the ground, and Nate and I were juggling back and forth where I was handling 2 tornadoes, he was handling 2. It was just an incredibly rough day. And I'm sure everybody here in this group has their own stories about what happened. The hardest part for me, I guess, was watching that tornado leave Sanford, and it was making a beeline to my house, to my neighborhood. I have family in town, and I was hoping and praying that they were watching the coverage on TV. And I know, Tim, you're on TV. How do you get the point across to people that you know to take shelter? I couldn't stop and pick up the phone and say, hey, listen, a tornado's coming to the house. You need to take cover. So that's one thing that was upsetting to me. The tornado passed about 50 yards from my house, damaged the subdivision right next to mine. I had some damage to some fencing. That was about it. I was very fortunate. And then after it passed my neighborhood, it was heading right here toward WRAL. And I remember Nate Johnson yelling out loud, everybody in the studio, go to the basement, because it was at the time coming straight to the TV station, but at the last moment, it moved a little farther east and hit downtown instead of coming here. So it was a really, really rough day. And I thought after all was said and done, because we were on there from 2 in the afternoon to 11 o'clock at night nonstop. I mean, we had continuous coverage the whole time. And when it was done, I thought, okay, this is going to be the worst. This is the benchmark of the worst coverage of a storm that I'll have in my career. But then we had Florence, and it was just days upon days of coverage with that. But yeah, it was not the best.
And Jeff, from a National Weather Service perspective, how did y'all prepare and how were y'all getting the message out in the days ahead of the event?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we had the moderate risk the day before, and we already had a feeling we were headed into a high risk, to be honest with you. So, we were already heavily staffed for that day. We already had a pretty good game plan. And I want to say by the time the storm started to move in from the west and really get going, I want to say we had at least a dozen people in the weather office, and we sectorized warning operations so that we could have 3 or 4 different folks issuing tornado warnings simultaneously, and at the same time, folks working with SKYWARN. I was kind of helping lead operations and also doing a lot of phone calls to the emergency managers. There's a lot of spin up ahead of this. There was a lot of email traffic, a lot of email briefings the day before. I remember even briefing Seymour Johnson Air Force Base because they were at the high risk at that point, and some of the precautions they were taking down there, in the east. So there was a lot of preparation for it. It's kind of one of those things where, like Mike was saying, everybody knew something bad was about to unfold. And I had been through Gerald, Texas, the tornadoes out there, and so going into this event, that was kind of the back of my mind that, we're headed into something, pretty big. And I do remember talking with Wake County and trying to explain what does a high risk day mean. I mean, the way we taught this in Texas was that, someone's going to die today. I mean, these are going to be big, long track tornadoes. And, this is going to be some serious stuff.
Jeff, you're talking about SKYWARN, the Storm Spotter group, and Jeremy and Dan, I want to bring you in here in just a second. But I imagine, like we were talking about, social media, not really that big of a thing at the time, with tweeting in reports, giving Facebook reports of the storm. How key were the SKYWARN Storm Spotters for you that day?
Yeah, and we've always had a great network across central North Carolina, so they've been outstanding. So we were getting a lot of real-time reports from spotters. They were calling on the phone. We actually had ham radio operators. I want to say we had 2 or 3 in the office ready for this. So the network was just lighting up. We were getting a lot of reports, almost to the point where as it approached Holly Springs, I mean, you couldn't keep up with them all. So that was a huge asset, and just a lot of people just calling in on the phone. It wasn't. We didn't have the social media like we do today, but we really pretty much knew what was going on. We had heard the Lowe's had been destroyed. About the time it was getting into Wake County, we'd already heard that the Lowe's hardware had been severely damaged or destroyed down there. And of course, you could see the debris ball on radar. So you kind of had a sense that this was really serious stuff going on. But there was a lot of great real-time reports, not only across the Raleigh area and down towards Sanford, but also with the Fayetteville up to a Williston tornado. I mean, we had a lot of great reports with that as well.
Mike, one question for you made me think. You were saying that before Florence, this was the biggest event you covered. Do you see any storm fatigue, even from 9 years from now, people kind of comparing severe weather events to April 16th?
There was a lot of anxiety every time a risk would come up. You'd feel that. You'd feel what happened on April 16th. I would worry every time we had like an SPC 3-day outlook, and on the 3-day outlook there was like a enhanced risk or maybe just a slight risk, and what it would be when we finally got to that day. And I got to the point where I was dreading severe weather coverage because of what happened that day. I'd get anxiety, I'd get scared, but I've gotten past that, and that's a good thing. I remember that day when we had the 4 tornadoes on the ground at one time. I was worried about, okay, how are we going to cover this? You can't show everything at one time. And we had to make sure, Nate and I had to make sure that we spent enough time on each storm to let people know that, it was coming to their communities, that they had to remain safe. But how do you juggle 4 tornadoes, inform everybody in their paths, and make sure you allot enough time so they know what's going on. We tended to hang with the one that went through Raleigh more and Fayetteville more because it was affecting larger populations, you know, but that was the hard part and the worrisome part, that we weren't giving enough, you know, coverage to one tornado and giving too much to another one.
Tossing over to Tim and Gannon as well, real quick. This was a career-defining event, one of the biggest, or definitely the biggest in North Carolina. Are there any specific memories or stories that you remember hearing about that day from viewers?
So I was in the Wilmington area, and if you look at the map, the kind of the final one with all the red lines, it confirms where all the tornadoes were. Oftentimes the worst stuff doesn't quite get to Wilmington, right? And in this case, it didn't either. So city of Wilmington was fine. A lot of the populated coastal centers were fine, but on the periphery in the rural areas, most of the tornadoes that we were covering for about 8 hours that day, Robeson County, Columbus County, Duplin County, Onslow County, those counties inland were the ones we were talking about the most. Bladen County had I think a 4 fatality storm. We, as always we do, actually got a lot of angry phone calls that day because most of the people in our area, they weren't seeing much other than blue sky. It was a really nice April morning. It was close to 80 degrees, I remember, breezy. There were NBA playoffs on at the day, so we were kind of fighting that battle in the newsroom, right, keeping people at bay a little bit while we were doing tornado coverage. Now later on, people understood how serious it was, especially once you started to see like the destroyed those foods and everything. But that was my first time ever really doing tornadoes, to be honest with you. It was my second year in Wilmington. Prior to that, I was in college, so I didn't know a lick about tornadoes. I grew up in upstate New York. I went to school in Pennsylvania. We don't get tornadoes. I mean, not really. So this was new for me too. But myself and Jerry Jackson, we were there for about, you know, I think we went on TV at 2 and we went off at about 8. So it was a while covering these things. And it was just amazing to me how there were very few, if any, false alarms. There were a million tornado warnings and there were a million tornadoes, to use hyperbole, but they were pretty much each cell produced as it was going through, and it was just boom, 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 one after the other, and a lot of damage was done, especially to the rural areas in Southeast North Carolina.
My second daughter was born on the 11th. I didn't come back to work till Friday, just throwing stuff out there. Saw the slight to moderate risk, alerting for storms going into Saturday. I was third on the pecking order to be coming in because we had our weekend person, we had our chief, and I was doing mornings. But it became clear, especially what was going down in central North Carolina. I was personally at home watching Nate Johnson with that tornado. It looked like a wedge, looked like a cloud just right to the ground that I was going in. And it's coming back to memories about just making sure you spend time on one storm to identify where the rotation is and give enough lead time before you have to move on to that next storm. And at some points, there were 6, 8 active warnings. Just a blur the way it just continuously unfolds. You hit a storm, you move on to a storm, you circle back. Population centers, as Mike mentioned, preferred. There was the one at Tarawa Terrace in Jacksonville. That was a big center in the Greenville-New Bern television market. Jacksonville is the largest city. We had to hit that. Then we saw the storm report that the Bertie County storm had actually killed numerous people, ended up killed 12 people. So that was surreal. When you are warning for storms and getting reports of damage, but no reports coming down off the wire or whatever that there's fatalities, and then all of a sudden numerous fatalities is still weird to talk about. End up being 12 in Bertie County. And then finally just going home that night, this event had everything. The event had everything, the setup, and then the final. I mean, sometimes we say as meteorologists we save lives. This was literally the only time that we were able to, some of our crews went out to Snow Hill in Greene County, and they were able to say, standing with a family in their house that was completely destroyed except for the interior part. and they said they were listening to our broadcast and they went into that interior part. So just a surreal event that I never want to forget. And I wanted to, so thanks again to give me a chance to talk to you guys about it and share the similar experiences.
Gannon, I think we've talked about this before off of this show, but this was also one of your more, one of your first tornado events, kind of bigger tornado events to cover, correct?
Yeah, I'd gotten to Greenville in October of 2004. There were a couple of active springs and falls as per usual. 2008 sticks out, but like Mike and Tim said, I mean, they're just usually just a couple tornadoes and then you move on, and maybe they're in rural areas and maybe they're not, you know, exceptional damage producers. But then this one just is bold-faced, italicized, and underlined when you look back on it. So yeah, the biggest event, and thank God it's still the biggest tornado event. Dorian was a huge producer, but still nothing compares to April 16, 2011.
I've been to a few conferences and I've heard, Jeff, I'll send this to you. You know, obviously 2011 remembered for the Tuscaloosa, Alabama, April 27th event. Had that not happened, this would have been the event that a lot of the meteorological community would have looked back on tornado-wise, Jeff. You know, as the Weather Service, I know you guys do a lot of meetings and stuff. Has this event kind of tailored some of your studies or some of your outlooks on stuff that you've, I guess, done case studies on this event to kind of find out the whys of what happened and how to better prepare for maybe the next setup we get like this?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt this event, I mean, it still stands out, even though, like you're saying, the later event was even larger than this one. You know, for our region, this is still, you know, what our benchmark, you know, storm. And, you know, it even went up, not even just to Carolinas, eventually went up into Virginia and did a lot of damage up there too. So, you know, it's been widely studied. You know, it was before some of the newer technology came out with on the radar, even some of the new impact-based warnings. So we've actually gone back in and rerun cases like this with what we call the impact-based warnings. And we did use tornado emergency, but nowadays we even have more tags we can put into the warnings to kind of say, okay, you know, it's radar confirmed on the ground before we even have, you know, spotter reports of anything on the ground. We can confirm it just using radar data. And so we've actually used cases like this and kind of run back through them with some of the new products and new ways that we issue tornado warnings, as well as some of the different dual pole products. So, you know, we do go back in and kind of practice and relive some of these events like this, putting them more into, I'd say, the current time. So this is definitely a benchmark event. We also look at it from a standpoint of, you know, staffing and how do you handle events like this, because they don't come around often. So, you know, you kind of go back and look at, you know, how does operations run in the Weather Service office when you have an event like this, making sure that, you know, you're dotting your I's or crossing your T's. You know, every storm is being interrogated, you know, simultaneously, and that you've got warning operations going, you know, for each individual storm, and you're doing your coordination with 911 centers and working with emergency management, and then keeping the damage reports, you know, as they're coming in, also sending them out. So, you know, looking at how an office should run, you know, and how we should be running our operations to keep things, you know, being pushed out so folks know what's happening. I mean, we use events like this to kind of go back and revisit and relive, you know, what we did right, and also sometimes where we can improve. But it's important to kind of take these events in context, realizing we'll have an event, something like this again at some point in the future. We hope not, but we've got to be ready for it.
And Jeff, one more question, then I want to get to Dan and Jeremy and let them talk about what they experienced out in the field. We were talking before this show. You guys, at a point in time, I think it was 5, 6, 7 minutes, were backed up by the National Weather Service in Blacksburg. Can you talk to our viewers tonight who may not realize in these situations when the Weather Service is actually in danger of getting hit by a tornado, you actually pass the coverage off to a neighboring office?
Yeah, so it's similar to what Mike was saying earlier. You know, about probably just shortly after the tornado went through Sanford, and we could see the massive debris ball on the radar. Before it got to Holly Springs, you know, we realized that this thing was coming into most likely southern Wake and eventually the south side of Raleigh, where the Weather Service office was. So I remember I picked up the phone and talked to the Blacksburg office. So we're paired so that a neighboring weather service office can really kind of basically restart their computer system, and they can come up as if they're, you know, the Raleigh Weather Service office. So we called them probably almost half an hour out and just said, hey, look, you know, we may get to the point where we've got to be backed up if this thing gets too close, so be ready to go, giving them a chance to get the radar up and running, the warning system up and running, things that they would need. And I think we called them back, I want to say about probably 15 to 20 minutes later, and we basically said, okay, this thing may really come get us now. And so I basically remember saying, if you hear from us again, you've got it. And so then what we started doing is we had 12 people in operation. So as it got closer, we started funneling some folks downstairs into the lower part of the building. And we kept 3 of us up in operations. And literally about the time we could see insulation and things falling outside the window, we picked up the phone and basically told Blacksburg, you know, okay, you've got it. We're sheltering at this point. And we had already issued the tornado emergency for Raleigh. So the warnings were already out for Raleigh. And then we sheltered downstairs, like you're saying, for probably about 7 minutes, and then came up. And the tornado passed just to our east, going up South Saunders Street.
Dan and Jeremy, y'all had a very different kind of experience. You guys were actually out in the field chasing these long track tornadoes. I guess, Dan, we'll start with you since you're the first on my screen. Kind of give us the firsthand perspective. What was it like actually being there within a mile of these monsters?
One of the things that we had at the time that we still use that was very active was the NC Storm Chasers and Forecasters group on Facebook. And fortunately, you know, there's a lot of information coming in through there being funneled in as well. And I remember I was in Alabama, I caught the storm, and all of a sudden there started being people kind of looking at some of the parameters for the next day in North Carolina. This was when it was at a moderate, I guess, before it got pushed to a high risk. And one of the things that was being looked at was how the storm system I was currently inside and the, you know, what was turning into a squall line in Alabama was going to keep pushing across into North Carolina. And they were seeing on the HRR runs how basically that squall line eventually was going to break apart into supercells. And that's when really the tornado potential would strengthen. And so when that started coming into play, I just hauled it right straight back towards North Carolina, drove all night long, and made it into Greensboro, Burlington area for the start of where the tornado warnings really kind of got going. Followed the storm in front of it. I actually was able to bust through it because I was inside of it / behind it until about Charlotte to Greensboro, somewhere in there. I busted through the front of it and got in front of the squall line, and then was in front of it near Burlington to Raleigh, somewhere in between there, maybe kind of close to Durham. And that's kind of when it went tornado warned, and it started to kind of quickly overwhelm my vehicle and me and my ability to keep chasing it. There's a couple things that were very clear about this storm system and about these storms, which is one, they were very fast moving. I remember they were going about 60 to 80 miles an hour. Was what I was trying to keep up with and stay in front of, and position myself in hook echoes so that I could try and get a good visual of these, for the most part, pretty rain-wrapped, low nature storms that were just hard to spot. I had great luck in Alabama the day before. I actually found myself up on a hill is kind of how I was able to see that tornado so well for such a long period of time. But this day it seems, you know, in North Carolina, a lot more heavy rain, a lot more heavy wind. I basically ended up inside of some severe winds going, I mean, you know, just at a guesstimate, you know, 50 to 70 miles an hour at the very least, sideways blowing rain. Once I got out of that, I tried to get back in position, ended up in that again. Eventually just kind of the whole storm inside of that tornado warning just overwhelmed me and got in front of me right as it got into Raleigh.
And just waiting for this line, and you know, we're sitting there going, oh man, this thing is not breaking up. There's no supercells, you know, what's happening. All of a sudden, obviously within a few frames it started to go. And so we're in Newton Grove still, and which was the right area to be. We just got a little impatient, and saw the first one. By then it was already hitting Sanford and the lows, and we decided to speed on towards Raleigh to try to get it there. And I do remember, as Mike May said earlier, the broadcast, Kevin had his ham radio with us. He had a ham radio in the car because he was doing the storm spotting. But I do remember that specific broadcast said, "Do not approach Raleigh, stop where you are," and all this stuff. And one thing I do remember about that whole day is just a surreal feeling that I can't even describe of the atmosphere. And the winds, even outside, the thunderstorms are blowing 40 to 50 miles an hour. Lots of inflow into these supercells from a long distance away, blowing dust and all of that. But when we got to Raleigh, as it was said, it went up South Saunders Street. We were not far from there, coming onto the Beltline. And it was, I remember specifically seeing the power flashes just to my left as we were coming in. And we stopped right there because we knew it was rain wrapped. We couldn't see it. And we looked for an exit after that. And then we were trying to decide, do we, for about a couple of minutes, do we try to keep up with this one? We all knew that the storms, as Dan said, were doing, forward speeds of 60 to 80 miles an hour. We're already behind it. We're in a metro area. We're like, no, let's get out of here. Let's go for the next one down the line. That was the Wilson storm. And interestingly enough, that storm hit Fayetteville first, that next cell down the line. And I have a friend there who was in contact with me pretty much before we were chasing the Raleigh one, saying, do I need to take shelter? Is this the real deal? And I looked, and the couplet was almost on top of them. And I'm like, yes, get in, And they got into a closet, and the tornado did hit their house. Fortunately, at that point, it was the start of that tornado's path. So it was weaker. They had a few shingles gone, but up the road from them, it turned into EF3 damage. So, but they were, they did take precautions and they were fine. I didn't find that out till later, but so then I had to beat the forward flank of that next cell. So coming out of Raleigh, so I was speeding definitely to beat that forward flank to get. I didn't want to get cored and then stuck and miss knowing how fast these storms were moving. So I was driving a Volkswagen Beetle at the time, and finally made it to 795 area. I got just a little bit south of it, and because I did want to get a clear view if there was a tornado. And then we were going up 795 northbound, so we get a straight on look at it, and I looked to my left, and I saw the rotation. I looked to my left, and like, is that what I think it is? Because it was there wasn't that much contrast at that point, and it was the open field, and so we just decided to stop there. And then it came out from some trees, and sure enough, that's the tornado, which many of you have probably seen the video of.
Marker 5.5, looking north-northeast. Large tornado on the ground, all the way to the ground.
Multiple times. Kevin called it in. I think the tornado was about 100 yards wide at that point. We were about a mile and a half away. I could have gotten a lot closer to it, but I did not know the area that well, so I didn't know if I was going to pull up. That's the only reason I didn't. I didn't want to lose the view we had, and I knew how fast it was moving. I knew we had one shot to get a look at it, and that was going to be it, and then it was going to be gone. And so we decided, all right, we got a good view here. Yeah, no, we're not super close, but we'll just stay where we are, and we're safe here. So we watched it, and then kind of faded into the rain from where we were as the rear flank downdraft came around. And we got hit by that a little bit. And then after that point, we took off for the next cell down the line, which we ended up in Farmville outside of Greenville. And we just missed it. We weren't fast enough. These storms were moving way too quickly. So we just had to find we actually had to use an escape route and go into the rain and hail so we'd get away from the couplet and let it pass because we weren't going to be able to see it from where we were. And then, so we did. And then we went into Farmville, and we saw the damage there. It just happened, but immediately, amazingly, the emergency crews were there. They were probably there within a minute or two after the storm passed. And so we took a look for a minute, and I remember letting, again, cell phone. I mean, smartphones were relatively new, but I did have one, Pickle 3. And I remember just letting a guy whose house got damaged use it to call his family. And then we wanted to get out of the way of the emergency services as quickly as we could. So then that was it. And then there was a squall line behind that. But that was it. And then we went home after that. And then the last thing I remember is going to the NC State Library to upload my footage to YouTube, since I had the super fast connection, as quickly as I could. And I think I remember emailing Mike Mays and sending him the link or something like that right away. And then Ariel, I know, put it up. And then it actually ended up in a few things, like a National Geographic did a special on that whole spring, because, as Dan said, there were a number of outbreaks that spring. Everybody remembers Tuscaloosa and all that. This was one of 3, I think, major outbreaks that they covered in that series. And so it ended up kind of spreading from there. And I think it is still my most viewed video to this date. But and that was about it. That was about the general summary of my day right there.
Were you guys able to, after this event, in the days to come, to go out and survey some of the damage? If so, what kind of stuck out to you guys?
Our biggest storm was in Bladen County, in Elizabethtown specifically. There were 4 fatalities there between, I believe, Elizabethtown and closer to Bladenboro. Also, a couple tornadoes up there in Bladen. And our reporters, I'll say they had a tough time coming back from those reports, because a lot of the structures really were just torn apart. It was EF2 damage, but a lot of mobile homes, a lot of weakly built structures there didn't stand a chance at all, based on the strength of the storms that day. So like we usually see in North Carolina, a lot of times the tornadoes are short-lived and on the grand scale rather weak. This was just, there were a ton of tornadoes, and most of them were really strong ones, by our measure at least, too. So the damage was much worse than we usually see in a tornado outbreak. It was tough to watch. I remember a lot of people really, if they weren't personally affected by it, emotionally they certainly were, and there was a big outreach to try and help folks in the weeks following.
So I have a question, Tim, coming back to you. How do you think the public responded as these warnings were going off and folks were being warned, hey, look, stay inside. These tornadoes are canvassing a wide area. There's no exacts, but do you feel like a majority of the public really responded well to that, or do you think maybe it was a learning lesson for a lot of folks?
Well, I think it is difficult. Every event is different, right? And I think after this event, probably people took warnings more seriously, because this was such a significant one and really a generational one. On that day, I can't really speak to how individual folks reacted. I think it was hard for them to understand. It was such a beautiful, bright, and sunny day in most of the areas until those storms got right up on top of you. So it was almost difficult to understand to the layperson how serious the weather really was. So a lot of these tornado warnings, like Dan was saying earlier, these storms are going 60, 80 miles per hour. The polygons were pretty big to account for that size, and you might have the warning going off and you're still in the sunshine, right? So that's not a typical response where you're going to shelter right away. You might take your time. So I do think that there was, number one, a challenge with it being a midday on a Saturday, a little harder for folks to maybe be paying attention normally. I guess it was always a case-by-case basis, but you look at the fatalities, there were a lot. There were just a lot. So I do think it was a learning lesson for a lot of folks after.
After all these storms had passed and the days following the event, you guys had to go out and conduct storm surveys. What did that look like, and how busy were y'all? Because that was a lot of tornadoes to cover.
And so within the first day, we knew we needed to get the fatal tornadoes that were long track. We needed to get those really well defined. And so we got those done. And then there was still some additional surveys on those 2, but then really you spent the rest of the week going out into different areas. It took about a week to survey the entire area to get all the tornadoes in. But we focused on the ones that we knew were the worst, that there was the most attention on, just to get the EF rating, the tracks, the intensity really identifying how the people died. When we lost people, that's a tough thing to have to do, to go out there and work with families that have lost everything. And a lot of times they're out there picking over their stuff, and you want to learn what they've gone through a little bit, but you've also got to be very careful. But most people really do want to talk to you and tell you their story. So we get out there and interact with them. The Lowe's was just an incredible story where they had heard the warning. And then somebody came in to the front of the Lowe's and basically said the tornado's coming. And I remember we talked to the manager. He got on the loudspeaker in the store and just told everybody to go to the back, where the bathrooms were. There's more infrastructure in the back. And of course, the tornado hit. It blew in those big sliding glass doors. It blew those in. The whole front wall of the Lowe's hardware blows in, and the front roof collapsed. And so the manager in that Lowe's, I mean, who knows how many lives he saved? But there was a lot of good stories like that. But there was a lot of tough stories with a lot of loss through the day. That makes it tough. But it took us a week to get our hands around all of the damage across central North Carolina.
What's your lasting memory from this event? If you could share it with the folks who are watching, what's your lasting memory from the event? I'll start with you first, Jeremy.
Well, with me, I think it was just even more than the tornado itself, was just a surreal feeling that entire day, and the surreal feel of the atmosphere, those winds, like I said, that were inflow into the storms themselves. Just the, I don't know, kind of nervous, like Mike Mays almost being a little bit scared. I think we all were a little bit. I mean, at least I was at the same time as being, excited to possibly see a tornado. Of course, I don't want to see anyone get hurt.
Nothing quite compares to what that system did. Everything from the speed to the tops of the storms being, in a lot of cases, kind of lower topped, and especially the moment where it went from the squall line into breaking up into those individual supercells. And seeing that, like Jeremy said, happen in a couple of frames on radar, aka 10 minutes in time, all of a sudden it went from a messy situation to you have 8 of the most textbook supercells in a line sweeping across the state at a high speed. Being in the middle of that and seeing the actual sun break through the squall line as those storms separated was just a surreal moment, something that I haven't seen happen in North Carolina since. Or anywhere really for that matter. I mean, every now and then a strong storm system will separate from a squall line to supercells, but I've never seen anything to that degree.
This was a long week event for us because it took a long time to get all the surveys done. But I mean, going back to that day, things I remember, obviously being in the office, but just how well everything did work. We did lose, more people than obviously you never want to lose anybody. We saved a lot of lives that day, and so going out there and seeing how much devastation there was and how many people were doing the right thing and seeing how well things went in the weather office. I remember watching WRAL like Mike was talking earlier, and they had tornado emergency just in big bold red across the bottom of the TV set. They were on wall-to-wall coverage. We were getting great spotter reports. It was one of those days where everybody was intensely worried. We all had a heightened awareness, but everything really worked the way it was supposed to work. I mean, everything we had practiced, all the work we've done with the media and SKYWARN and the training inside the office, it just all came together. And so, while we lost people that day, and that's always a tragic thing, there was a lot of things that did work, and a lot of people came together and I'd say performed at a top level. And at the end of the day, it saved lives.
For me, I was definitely still a kid at the moment. I think I was 23 years old or 24 years old or something like that. And thankfully, Jerry Jackson, who I was working with at the time, he had drilled with us, very basic severe weather coverage do's and don'ts. Like 3 simple things: tell folks where the storm is, where it's going, what they should do, and then tell them again. And if you have more than one storm, do 1, 2, 3, however many you have, then go back to the first one. So we really boiled it down to basics. I think we did a pretty good job that day. And I think, this event really prepared me for further events down the road, to not get too amped up, too nervous or whatever. Just kind of keep it simple, tell folks what they need to know and what they need to do. And that's really the whole reason why we're here, right? So this is a big moment for North Carolina, and just personally for me, and kind of seeing what the weather can do and why we're here.
I do remember one point, I couldn't tell you what time it was, but it was just we had a little Viper radar system from Barron in the office. That was our primary drive thing. And I remember we would go out and expand and zoom into like Kansas or Oklahoma when they would be having their events, and we would see what the radar would look like. And I remember just thinking to myself at some point, I should be seeing I-35. I should be seeing like OKC and Wichita as delineators here. Instead, I'm seeing Kinston and Goldsboro. And it was just really crazy to see those kind of returns. Everything classic supercells all lined up in a row.
Gentlemen, we definitely appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for going over this with us. Thank you guys who are watching tonight. Thank you for allowing us to step back in Carolina weather history and talk about this event. Be sure to check out this week. We'll be posting some more updates about this event throughout our social media pages, so be sure to check that as well. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have a great evening, and we'll talk to you next time.